Hi everyone, and you are welcome to Introduction to the Inheritance Relationship lecture. Let's start this lecture by a few quick questions. Let's say that I want to define a class for an electronic item. After that, I decided to define a class to represent a phone. But at the end, I know that the phone is just an electronic item, which means it should have all the attributes and the methods that an electronic item has. In this case, rather than redefining all the attributes and methods from scratch, it's better to inherit these members from the electronic item class. So hold on, what's inheritance and what are the different types of inheritance relationships? So if you are not familiar with this concept before, join me in this lecture. In this lecture, first of all, I'll start by a quick definition to what inheritance is. Then we will see together the available types of inheritance relationship. We will talk a bit about single inheritance, multiple inheritance, multi-level inheritance, and hierarchical inheritance, and I'll end up this lecture by a quick summary. So let's get started. So what's inheritance? If I want to define this relationship, simply I say it's just the relationship that allows us to define a class that inherits all the methods and attributes from other classes. To understand this concept properly, first of all, I want to share with you some concepts before I share a real example to understand what I mean exactly by inheritance in context of programming. So, in context of inheritance, we call the class that is inherited from the parent class or the base class. And we call the class that inherits from another class, child class or derived class. The last point that I need you to know, that usually we describe this relationship by the word is. So let's say if I have a class A and it inherits the class B, so simply we can say A is B. Now to grasp the idea of inheritance, let me show you a real example. Assume that I want to define a class for electronic items, so I need to represent these electronic items inside my computer. First of all, we will define a class which is electronic item. And we put in this class the common feature between all of electronics items, like for example, let's say number of transistor. After that, when I want to define a specific electronic item, like for example, phones and sound systems, instead of redefining this attribute, which is number of transistors, again inside each one of this class, I will make both phones and sound system inherit this attribute from the electronic systems. But hold on. Also, we know that from the type phones, we have mobile phones and cord phones. So for example, for the phones, we have one attribute, which is screen size, let's say. So when you want to define mobile phones and cord phones, no need again to redefine this attribute. All what you have to do is to make mobile phones and cord phones inherit this class. And the same thing exactly for the sound systems. Let's say it has an attribute like voice quality. So when you want to define earplugs or stereos classes, in this case, no need to redefine this attribute, and all what you have to do is inheriting this attribute from the sound system. Now you can see from this diagram that if I go from the bottom to the top of this diagram, I am doing generalization, which means I am moving from the special class to the more general class. And when you move from top to the bottom of this diagram, we are doing specialization, which means I'm going from the most common class to the most special class. And for this reason, sometimes we call inheritance relationship as generalization and specialization relationship. Now don't worry if you don't fully understand this example, because later on I'll show you in code how we implement this and what is the value of using inheritance relationship in our programs. When we talk about inheritance, we have to know that we have multiple types of this relationship, and these types are single, multiple, multi-level, and hierarchical inheritance. And if you want to differentiate between these relationship types, all what you have to know is the following: that usually we differentiate between them based on number of child and parent classes involved in the relationship. Now let's talk about the first type of inheritance relationship, which is single inheritance. In this type, actually, we have a single child class which inherits all the methods and attributes from a single parent class. And if you want to visualize this relationship, you can imagine a diagram like this. And you see we have one child and one parent class. The second type of this relationship is multiple inheritance. And in this type, usually we have a single child class which inherits all the methods and the attributes from multiple parent classes. So if you want to visualize, you can understand the relationship like this. We have one child which inherits from parent class 1 and parent class 2. And by the way, you can have as many as you want of these parent classes. Now let's talk about the third type of this relationship, which is multi-level inheritance. In this type, actually, we have a single child class which inherits all the methods and attributes from multi-level parent classes. So if I want to visualize this relationship, I can say that we have one class or son, let's say, which inherit an intermediate class, which we call father, and this class inherits the base class, which is the grandfather. In this case, the son inherits everything from the father and the grandfather, and the father can inherit everything from the grandfather, which is the basic class in this case. So it's quite clear here that this relationship is similar to son, father, and grandfather relationship. The last type of this relationship is known as hierarchical inheritance. And in this relationship type, actually, we have multiple children classes inherit all the methods and attributes from a single parent class. And visually, you can understand this relationship in the following way. We have 1, 2, and 3 children classes, and all of them inherit the attributes and method from one parent class. That's all for this lecture. Now let's summarize what we have learned quickly. First of all, inheritance relationship has been defined, and we see it's a relationship that allows us to define a class that inherits all the methods and attributes from other classes. And we see that from this relationship we have 4 types. The first one is single inheritance, the second one is multiple inheritance, the third one is multi-level inheritance, and the last one is hierarchical inheritance. And the differences between these types depends on number of children classes and number of parent classes. In the following lecture, we will talk about each one of these types in details with code example to show you how exactly we can implement this relationship in Python programming language. That's all for this lecture. Thank you so much for your time, and if you are available, join me in the next lecture.